Hi, I'm Heather Handmade, and today I am going to teach you how to sew a button on. By hand is the quickest and strongest way to sew a button on. It's great to be able to sew buttons onto clothes you are making, or if you have a button fall off of something that you bought at the store, this is a really quick way to sew it back on. If you don't have a sewing machine, you can still do the way by hand. You just need a little hand needle and some thread. It works really well. This is a piece of quilting cotton, and I've folded it in half. This is just an example of how you would sew the button, but usually you would have interfacing right in here, which would give extra support with the the pulling of the button. So what you're going to do is you have a needle, you have a button. This is a button with 4 different holes. Just a simple, it's probably a 5/8 diameter button, and then some thread. So what I like to do, this is the strongest way to sew on a button, and it's the quickest. I never have a problem with this method of the button falling off later, but it's pretty easy to do. So what you're going to do is you are going to pull out some thread, and since we are going to double it, you kind of need to pull some extra thread out. So I'm going to cut that off and move the thread to the side. So I have this thread, and I'm putting both ends together, both of these cut ends. So thread, if you get irritated if your thread twists and pulls together or something, you can buy beeswax, and then you just run the thread through the beeswax. You just kind of pull it through, and it coats beeswax onto the thread to make it more slippery. I don't have any at this time, so I'm gonna do it without, but that's a great way if you struggle with your threads, tangling up. So I'm putting both of those ends together like this, and I'm gonna put both of them through the needle. So I have both of those threads pulled through, and then I'm gonna pull, this end is the loop and this end is the 2 ends. I'm gonna pull that through, so my needle's over here, and I'm going to tie a knot on this side, and it's just, I don't actually know what knot this is called, where you just make a loop and pull it through. So I have this tail, then I have 4 threads, and then I have my needle. So this 4 threads makes the button a lot stronger, and it means you have to do less loops when you go through. So I'm holding my button right here on the fabric, and you don't actually want the button to be flat, really tight against the fabric, because when you come with a buttonhole, you're going to have a layer of fabric right here in between the button and this part. You need to have some space in between. So I kind of like to hold it so I'm holding one side with my finger and my thumb, and then this side's kind of loose, and that way as I'm sewing I don't have to pull it so tight. So I'm starting with the thread tail in the back. You can start underneath if you want, but it doesn't really matter. I'm starting in the back, and I'm coming up 1 hole like this, and if you can either do the button where you sew it like an X, so you go to these ones and then to these ones, or you can even go where you go across and then across this way. So it's your personal preference, whichever one you like better, and it depends on the fabric. Maybe there's a print that looks better with one over the other. So I'm going to do an X. Remember, I'm keeping that space in here. So I came up on one corner, and I'm going down on the opposite corner, and I'm gonna pull it, but I'm not pulling it super tight. Then I come up in the same place where I started over here on this side, and I pull it up. Make sure there's a little bit of space. Come down again on the across. Like this. Then I'm going to come up right next to where I started over here on this side. Then I'm going to come across to the hole I haven't done yet. Like this. Leave some space and then come up again and then come down through here. This is the last hole you go through. Once you've gone across twice on each side, so what you're going to do is when you come to the back, make sure you still have that space in the button. You are going to take your needle and come up where you just went down, but you don't want to come through a hole like this. You actually want to come out on the side of the buttonhole, or on the button over here. So I'm pulling my thread out, and what we're going to do is, you can see how we have just a tiny bit of space right there for the buttonhole to sit right here. We need to create a shank, and that's like leaving a little section that keeps the button sitting away from the fabric. So what I like to do is I take my thread and I wrap around the button 4 times. So this is wrapping those threads that is connecting from the fabric to the button. I'm wrapping that around 4 times, and since you left a little bit of space between the button and the fabric, it actually pulls all of those together and it creates just a tiny little thread shank, and it helps that fabric, the button, sit away from the fabric. Then you're going to sew a square knot. So what I like to do is I find a hole and it has the thread right here. So I'm going to come through. This is coming from the right to the left. So I pull through, and before I pull all of the fabric or all of the thread through, so I'm leaving this loop like this, and then I'm coming up through that loop and then pulling it tight. Then I come to the other side in the exact same thread. I pull through this way, and then I also leave a loop that I'm going to come through. That creates a square knot because you did one side and then the other side. Pull that tight. There's your thread shank, and their button doesn't sit flat, it sits a little bit away. And the best way to hide these thread tails in the fabric so that you don't see it is I take my needle and I come down right here in the fabric, really close to where I ended. And what I do is I'm pulling my needle between the layers of fabric. So as you can see, the needle is in here, and you can start to see it on the other side. So I push that back in. So the needle's going between the 2 layers of fabric. So it's hiding inside, and you go out until you can't, your needle's about to go all the way in the fabric. And then that's when you poke out on the other side. So you pull that thread inside, so you have this long thread tail that's going to sit in the fabric, which makes it much harder for these knots to come undone, and it's much harder for that thread tail to come out and just be hanging out where you don't want people to see it. You want it to be hiding. And then you trim that. You might have to pull the fabric slightly to get the thread tails to stay inside. And that is how you sew the quickest and the fastest button by hand. This is my favorite way to do it by hand. It's strong, and it works very well. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial about how to sew a button on, and tell me which method you like to use in the comments. Do you like to use a sewing machine, or do you like to sew buttons on by hand? Thanks for watching my video. I hope you have a wonderful day.